Hello everybody and welcome to This Upbeat Life, the show where we take a light-hearted look at life and go on a journey to find out how people stay physically and mentally happy. I'm Simon JJ Green and I'll be interviewing ordinary, bog-standard people as well as looking at the latest in wellness, health science, nature and the quirkier side of the health and wellbeing industry. Now, let's get cracking with today's episode. Hello, my friends, and welcome to today's episode of This Upbeat Life. Now, today on Quick News, it's International Day. Yes, International Day is where we look at something amazing that is being celebrated nationally or globally. Now, I just happen to have lucked out. At the time of recording, we're celebrating International Doughnut Day. Yay! So I thought I'd do a quick fact check about doughnuts. What a rabbit hole that's turned out to be. Did you know that doughnuts have been around in one form or another for quite a while? Now, unless you've been living under a rock, everyone knows that a doughnut is essentially a fried blob of dough that is a sweet treat. But why have a day of recognition dedicated to a bit of pastry, you may ask? Well, according to foodtimeline.org, Americans observe Doughnut Day on the first Friday in June. Doughnut Day was launched in 1917 as a way to support the morale of American troop stations during World War I. It began as a huge bake sale, selling real doughnuts at premium prices for charitable purposes. In the 1920s, the drive was held in many cities and hosted by several organizations. Now, I'm not going to go into the earliest iterations of doughnuts that may have originated from China or medieval Europe, but I will start with the generally accepted notion that it was the Dutch that introduced our modern version of the doughnut with their oily cakes, or oil cakes, a sweetened ball of dough that was fried. Now, this was taken to America by Dutch settlers and was altered by families as they developed their own recipes. Now, in those days, it seems that they were any shape, the most common being diamond-shaped or turned into twists and then fried. But the problem persisted that while they were golden brown and lovely on the outside, they were often still raw in the middle. But hold on to your dough balls. In 1847, a young sailor who was 16, by the name of Hanson Gregory, had pondered this massive dilemma enough that he had a brainwave. He took the top from a pepper pot, allegedly, and punched a hole through the dough, allowing the doughnut to cook evenly, and the rest is history. So the doughnut managed to solidify its place in American hearts and arteries during the early 20th century, and that would seem to be the end of it. But I have discovered something that could start another civil war. Oh yeah, the Daily Mail, which is the UK newspaper for incredibly intelligent and discerning readers, wrote an article in 2013 saying that the doughnut was in fact a British invention. Yeah, of course it was. Yes, it turns out that documents have been unearthed showing the wife of a society doctor in Hertford, England, recorded her own recipe for them back in 1800. Baroness Elizabeth Dimsdale's recipe for Doughnut, which is spelt D-O-W, was taken, actually stolen by the looks of it, from a local cook, known only as Mrs. Fordham. Now, Mrs. Fordham's recipe says that you should use, and I quote, a quarter of a peck of flour. What do you mean you don't know what a peck is? Which is between 12 and 14 pounds or 5.5 or to 6 kilos. A pound of moist sugar, 10 whole eggs, 1 whole nutmeg grated, 3/4 of a pound of fresh butter, and 1/4 of a pint of yeast. Her ingredients were then made into a dough which was rolled out and cut into nuts, which were then deep fried in hog's lard before being covered in sugar and left to rise by the fire. Now, funnily enough, doughnuts were not popular in Britain until much later, and now they're available everywhere. Meanwhile, according to planetdoughnut.co.uk and other sources, our American cousins eat approximately 10 billion doughnuts a year, which is about the equivalent of 146 per person in the UK. And globally, get this, it's 28 billion doughnuts being consumed a year. As for me, I have tried virtually all the donuts I could in my travels around the world, which explains my middle. But time and again, I end up going back to the UK for a bag of freshly cooked mini ring donuts, dusted in cinnamon sugar, which I can usually find at a local fun fair. Now, being ancient and set in my ways, I can't be doing with the likes of Krispy Kremes, who incidentally sell about 2 billion donuts a year. Okay, I'm hungry now. And if you have a favourite type of donut, share it with me at thisupbeatlife@gmail.com or comment somewhere. I still haven't found out how people can comment on an audio podcast. And the real question being asked, can you have savoury donuts? Now, I won't even dignify that with an answer, other than to say that in England, if you even thought about it, you would go to prison. Now, a serious subject on The Real Deal. Loneliness. Ever felt alone, even though you're surrounded by people? It's truly staggering how many people feel lonely and isolated. From teens to older people, even people in nursing homes who, despite having family, still feel deserted. In fact, the World Health Organization and the US Surgeon General consider loneliness a major growing global health threat, often described as an epidemic. And about 1 in 6 people worldwide experience loneliness, with severe health impacts that are comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, raising risks for dementia, stroke, and heart disease. Now, humans are a social animal, typically. Well, most of us are. I mean, I do know a couple of curmudgeonly types that prefer their own company, but on the whole, we all like to know that there's someone there we can talk to, or if you're married, moan at. But for many people, especially the elderly, they've got no one, save that 1-minute chat with the checkout person at the supermarket. And even that is now changing with the uptake of robots and self-serve checkouts. But there are a few initiatives out there that I thought were a great idea. Yeah. Now, welcome to The Real Deal, the part of this show that insists on finding joy in unexpected places. And today's prescription, is a museum. It's not medication or a yoga retreat. It's not even a cold plunge in a barrel while someone films you swearing for social media. No, today I'm talking about museums, tackling one of the quiet epidemics of modern life, loneliness. Now, somewhere along the line, museums stopped being places where you shuffle past dusty artifacts and pretended to understand abstract art, and started being something way more interesting. Places designed to bring people together. So let's start with a great idea. At University College London, researchers launched something called Museums on Prescription. And it's exactly what it sounds like. Instead of, or alongside, traditional treatments, people experiencing loneliness or mild mental health challenges are referred to museum programs. So imagine dropping into your GP and being told, take 2 turners and call me in the morning. So participants join small groups, usually over several weeks. They don't just wander around silently like monks. They handle objects, share stories, create things, talk. And slowly, gently, they connect. And here's the clever bit. It doesn't really feel like therapy. No awkward chairs in a circle, no forced confessions. Just people, objects, and a shared curiosity about the world. Now, it turns out that standing next to a Roman artifact and wondering aloud, what on earth did they use that for, is a surprisingly good way to start a conversation. And this idea hasn't stayed politely in London either. Across Europe and North America, museums have been quietly reinventing themselves as social spaces. In Canada and France, doctors are also prescribing museum visits, which raises the delightful possibility that somewhere someone is medically required to look at Impressionist paintings once a week. But prescriptions are only one part of the story. Many museums now run dedicated social programs, small friendly gatherings designed specifically for people who might otherwise feel isolated. Take the Royal Albert Memorial Museum and Art Gallery, for instance. Their museum meetups bring people together regularly, not just for a one-off visit, but for something consistent. And consistency, it turns out, is everything. You see, loneliness isn't cured by a single cheerful afternoon. It's eased by seeing the same faces week after week, until strangers become familiar, and familiar becomes, well, almost friends. And there's also been a quiet revolution in what museums actually do, because simply looking at things, however fascinating, is a slightly solitary activity. So museums have leaned into participation. You'll now find art workshops, storytelling sessions, music, even movement classes. People are encouraged to touch, make, and discuss. In short, just to take part. It's the difference between sitting in a cinema alone Actually, I like sitting in a cinema alone. And joining a lively dinner party where everyone has an opinion about the main course. And then there's the outreach, because not everyone feels comfortable walking into a museum. For some, it can feel intimidating or simply irrelevant. So, museums have started going out into the world, into care homes, community centres, hospitals. Artifacts travel, stories travel, conversations travel. The museum, in effect, leaves the building. And perhaps the most interesting of all is how museums are subtly redesigning themselves. More seating, more shared spaces, more cafes where lingering is positively encouraged, less of the do not touch and more of the come in and stay a while. Yeah, they're becoming places where you don't just visit, you spend time. And that matters, because loneliness isn't simply about being alone, it's about lacking meaningful connection. And meaningful connection really happens in a rush. It needs time, space, and often something to talk about, which is where museums have a rather unfair advantage. They are quite literally full of conversation starters. A painting, a fossil, that's not me. A curious object about whose purpose is entirely unclear. You don't need to be brilliant at small talk when there's a 2,000-year-old mystery sitting between you. Now, before we all start prescribing ourselves a weekly wander through ancient pottery, there's got to be a reality check here. Museums aren't a miracle cure. Now, they don't work for everyone. Some people still find them dull. Others feel they don't belong. And no amount of Roman coins will fix that unless the experience feels relevant and welcoming. But when it does work, it works rather well. Because it's gentle, it's human, and it reminds us that connection doesn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it starts with something as simple as standing next to someone and saying, "What do you think that is?" And discovering to your surprise that they're wondering exactly the same thing. So, the next time you pass a museum, don't think of it as a place you ought to visit. Think of it as a place where, quite possibly, someone else is looking for a bit of connection. And who knows? You might come for the artifacts and leave having collected something far more valuable. Yes, in Far Out Stuff, picture the scene. You've been out with friends and had a lovely evening wining and dining at the local Chinese restaurant, and now you've come home and it's late. You're feeling slightly snackish, so you open the fridge to just check and see if there's something small to eat. You know you shouldn't, but surely a tiny nibble can't do any harm. In the pale aura of the fridge light, you spot a wedge of Stilton. A bit of cheese with a couple of crackers will set you up nicely. As you munch contentedly on the cheesy goodness, you briefly remember some old wives' tale that you shouldn't eat cheese before you go to bed because it gives you nightmares. You pause briefly, a morsel of Stilton balanced on a small cracker trembling at your lips. Then you shrug, and you wolf it down. At 4 a.m, you sit bolt upright in bed, drenched in sweat, reeling from a nightmare about a giant armadillo in pink leg warmers chasing you with a pair of chopsticks as you frantically wade through treacle, or sweet and sour sauce, whichever. Don't eat cheese before bed is like one of those bits of inherited wisdom passed down through the generations. Somewhere between don't sit too close to the television or you'll go blind, and you'll catch your death if you go out with wet hair. But rather inconveniently for folklore, science has decided to get involved. Now, according to various nutritionists and sleep researchers, there is some truth lurking beneath the rind. Cheese, particularly the rich, indulgent sort, the kind that smells faintly of feet and costs more than a decent bottle of wine, can be quite hard work for your digestive system. Now, if you eat late at night, your body doesn't simply clock off and take a nap. No, you have done your body a disservice. So it rolls up its sleeves and gets stuck into a full-blown dairy processing operation. Not for the faint of heart. Now, while your stomach is hosting what is essentially a late-night cheese conference, your brain is supposed to be slipping into deep restorative sleep. But instead of drifting peacefully into the abyss, it's hovering at a lighter sleep stage, what experts call REM sleep, when your dreams tend to occur. And here's the sciencey bit. When your REM sleep happens closer to the moment you wake up, you're far more likely to remember your dreams, both good and bad. So it's not necessarily the cheese that's creating the nightmares. It may simply be making them more memorable. And technically, the cheese isn't the villain, it's you for eating cheese so late. Now, before we all start pointing fingers at an innocent brie, there's more to consider. Some cheeses contain compounds like tyramine, which can stimulate brain activity. Others are just rich, fatty, and unapologetically indulgent. And that's me, but not rich, just poor and fatty. These cheeses are hardly the ideal bedtime snack if your goal is to sleep like a contented Victorian child in a storybook illustration. And if you happen to be lactose intolerant or sensitive to certain foods, then things can take a more dramatic turn. For example, your body may respond with discomfort, bloating, or general digestive unrest, none of which lends themselves to serene dreams of floating through fields of lavender. There have even been small studies and surveys suggesting that different cheeses might influence dreams in different ways, which raises the delightful possibility that somewhere someone's woken up and thought, oh yeah, that was definitely a cheddary dream, notes of mild anxiety with a slightly nutty finish. Now, what is most interesting, though, is how this belief has endured. For centuries, cheese has been cast as the nocturnal villain, the culinary equivalent of that friend who suggests just one more drink and then disappears while you deal with the consequences. And yet, despite all the warnings, we persist. Maybe it's just because cheese is simply irresistible. But let's be honest, there is something deeply comforting about a late-night nibble of cheese. It feels indulgent, slightly rebellious, and entirely civilized. A quiet moment at the end of the day, perhaps with a cracker, perhaps standing in front of the fridge in your slippers, contemplating life while you pick the fluff out of your belly button. It's also worth pointing out that it's not just the cheese that is blamed for bad dreams. Oh no, the finger of guilt has also been pointed at sweet desserts and spicy food. Darn it. So, does cheese before bed really cause nightmares? Well, not exactly. Cheese is less of a horror movie director and more of a over-enthusiastic stage manager, bringing your dreams forward, turning up the lights and making sure you don't miss the performance. So we're left with a dilemma. Do we avoid cheese before bed in pursuit of a perfectly undisturbed 40 winks? Or do we embrace the possibility that, thanks to a humble slice of brie, we might have the key to lucid dreaming, where we can control the dream and potentially our nightmares? Now, personally, I'm not cerebral enough to worry about it, so I don't give a damn because I'm cheesy going. Okay, a couple of cheesy jokes then, because, nobody asked for them. When should you go on a cheese diet? If you need a cheddar a few pounds. Get it shed a few pounds. Never mind. Why does cheese look rational? Because everything else on the plate is crackers, obviously. What do you call cheese that isn't yours? Nacho cheese. Okay, no more. Right, until next time, my friends, this is about as good as it gets. And that's it for today. Thanks for listening, everybody. As always, I'd appreciate it if you could like, follow, and subscribe to my show, This Upbeat Life, so I know I'm on the right track. And even better, leave a review and share it with your friends. Until next time, remember, happiness is the best medicine. Cheerio.